Hello.
For a bit of his career. John, thank you so much for joining me. It's a kind of English takeover for a little bit on this happy hour tonight, but because we're both here in the UK while we see out this travel ban. But thank you so much for staying up late because it's 11 o'clock in the evening here, and for joining us on this very nice virtual happy hour that we have.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, you had me really from the moment when you called me up and said, would I do it? When you said that it involved having a pint of beer whilst broadcasting. So from that moment on, I was in. So cheers.
Yeah, cheers to you. It's good to see that we've both chosen. I just said before we brought you in, actually, I would fancy the Breakaway Session IPA is the two beers that Fat Bottom Brewery have produced for Nashville this year. I think you would be a Breakaway Session IPA man as well. So it's cheers to you, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. So, well, we are only 2 games into this season, so it gives us a chance, though, to look back at kind of your MLS journey over the years. Now, you moved full-time to the States last year to take up the role as the lead man with MLS and ESPN. How have you found that move over to the States, and how much are you enjoying it?
Very much. I mean, it's just such a shame, as with all of us, that it's been interrupted in this fashion at the moment. But I had a fantastic first year. I'd had a bit of a taste of MLS over the previous 5 or 6 years, coming over maybe 3 or 4 times a season to call a game here and there. And they were very clever, ESPN. They gave me games like Seattle-Portland, games of that sort of magnitude, which felt like really big occasions. And so I was quickly sold on the idea of MLS as a growing league. And over a period of years, they sort of suggested to me that they would like me to come over and do it full time. And I was never quite in a position to commit family-wise. We've got 4 kids, aged 17 to 24. They were at various stages of their education. It didn't really stack up at that stage. But ESPN were nothing if not persistent. Their people would come over and meet me in London pretty much once a year, and we'd have a chat. And eventually I decided that the time was right and got the agreement of my wife and our youngest son, who's come over to be a junior in high school. We're living in Boston, and then we made the move. So I came over last February. I had 6 months on my own, and then my wife Anna and my son Will joined us in August. So he's had nearly a complete school year. In fact, he's doing homeschooling from here at the moment. So he gets up at lunchtime with the 5-hour time difference between us in the UK and Eastern time in Boston, and sits there and has his lessons from his American school teachers.
I can imagine that getting up at lunchtime is not a chore for him at that.
No, mind you, even today it was a bit of a problem getting him up in time. But yeah, he's certainly adjusted to the time difference.
Well, they're saying with all the times we're in, of course, at the moment, that people are going to bed earlier and people sleeping in later. It is a big adjustment that we're all doing, and so much of this home working and so much of this talking remotely. When you look at the decision then to move and getting into the league full time, I mean, you were doing EPL, you were doing EFL, European football, but then it's 100% MLS. How much have you enjoyed just focusing on that, particularly on that one league for most of the year now?
It's been great because I'd had so long. I mean, I was so lucky in having so long working on the top properties in the UK and across Europe. And I still hope to be able to do a bit of that here and there. I went back at Christmas and called 5 Premier League games, which was great fun. And I hope when the World Cup comes around, there'll still be a role. I've racked up 8 of them so far, and I don't want to stop at 8. I want to get into double figures. But I think after 35 years of doing the Premier League, and before that, the old First Division, that's how old I am, you get to the stage where you kind of know all the people that are involved. The information comes to you quite easily. And you do find that on occasion you're telling the same story, whether it's Wolves' battle against relegation in a particular season or Southampton's struggles, whatever it might be, you're telling it for the 4th, 5th or 6th time. So the opportunity to move to an entirely new arena where no one really knows you, you've got to forge all those contacts from scratch. You're dealing with players who, by and large, you've not really come across before. It's just a completely new challenge. Coupled with the fact, as you're discovering, Tony, American sports broadcasting is very different to the way it's done in Europe. So you almost have to learn the job again. So it was just a chance, in my case, in my 50s, to actually turn the page and think, right, hopefully I've done as well as I can in that marketplace that I've worked for all those years. But I feel I've got another challenge in me. And I think MLS, given the rate of growth of the product and the league and the sport in this vast country, it's just something I thought, if I'm going to have one last challenge, it needs to be now so I can give it everything. So the timing was key, really. I just felt if I'd left it another 5-10 years, I'd have found an excuse not to do it. And I don't want to miss out on what I think is going to be a very exciting chapter in the further growth of soccer in America.
Yeah, I think I'd echo everything you say there. I think that's the thing sometimes, isn't it? Sometimes the challenge is just a really, really good one to take on, and to do it in a different culture, different climates, and as you say, a different league. It's really something that appeals to both of us, I think. When you look at how you managed to get into MLS day to day and really kind of dive deep into it, I know Taylor Thrallman's been a massive help with that.
Yes, yeah, he's been great. He's been everything I could have asked for and more, both in terms of professionalism and company and friendship as well. He's been great. I mean, he was one of those that was sort of angling within the company for me to come over. My history with ESPN goes back initially to 2009 when they took on the UK live Premier League rights, when they had a UK station, and that lasted for 4 very happy years. Then they were outbid by BT for the live domestic rights along with Sky in the UK. And I was left going and doing Premier League productions, which is the world feed of the Premier League, working some of the time for BT, some of the time for ITV, and putting together a portfolio of work to do. And then in 2014, ESPN in America asked me to do the World Cup in Brazil. And they'd asked me to do 2010. I'd already signed a contract to work for ITV, the main commercial broadcaster in the UK, to do that for them. So I politely said no, but they sort of kept my name on file and asked if I'd do 2014. I hadn't committed elsewhere. And I just fancied, again, a different challenge, a change. So I signed up to do that. And I encountered then the way in which the big American networks just do TV sports on a different scale to anything we've ever really come across in Europe. You know, ESPN went around signing up the very top name pundits from right around the world. Their studio set was on Copacabana Beach. Most broadcasters would just build a scaffold platform with the nice backdrop. They bought a yacht club. And they made that their base for a month. And I'd never seen such care and attention and indeed money lavished on a production on this scale before. And I was swept away by it. And fortunately, they quite liked me. And off the back of that, they offered me a deal to come over and do a certain number of appearances for each year. And that eventually morphed into this deal to come over full time. So it was a gradual process, but it didn't take me long to be sold on the idea.
Now, it's interesting when you say about the investment that ESPN put into it. And of course, for you, this is a big new challenge, particularly when we move it to you coming into MLS. Have you changed your style very much? Are you conscious of the market you're now in, the audience that you're now in? Are you a very different John Champion in the US to what the British audiences heard for many years?
I think not wildly different. And that was one of the assurances that I sought from ESPN before I signed on the dotted line, really. And it was one of the assurances that I got from them before that World Cup in 2014, that they were buying what they regarded, rightly or wrongly, as authenticity. Now, this is a whole big argument on its own. Should American commentators be commentating on American soccer? Many people would say, yes, they should be. But I think there was just a feeling, given the point on the developmental curve of the profile of the sport, that maybe there was some mileage in having one or two British voices who were relatively well known in connection with the sport right around the world, coming over and signing up with American and the soccer crusade in this country. And I suppose I benefited from that. And coming back to your question about Taylor, he was the one that really gave me the inside track on what life could be like in the United States covering soccer. And he was true to his word. I mean, he has identified the direction in which it's heading, the speed at which it is heading in that direction. I think the 2026 World Cup is seen by so many people potentially as a watershed moment for the sport, rather in the same way that 1994 was going to be. And I remember being at the 1994 World Cup and traveling around the US, a vast country, and at times, apart from when I was at the games, wondering whether a World Cup was on. Now, when we come to 2026, there'll be no mistaking the fact that the US and Canada and Mexico are hosting the biggest soccer event on earth, because there is such a difference in the way that the nation as a whole has embraced soccer to the point where it's probably now in at number 5 on the list of the major sports.
Sure, and when you look at embracing soccer, 59,000 Nissan Stadium, opening end of the MLS season, first MLS game for Nashville SC, a really special night. Now I know that obviously Fox broadcast that game. Then we went to week 2, the trip to Portland, and that was your first opportunity to see Nashville away at Portland. What did you make of their performance that night? I felt watching here, I felt they were very, very unfortunate not to take something from the game.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a really encouraging performance, as was the display against Atlanta in week one. But I mean, two tough assignments to start life as a fully fledged Major League Soccer team, and it's just a shame they haven't had the chance in subsequent weeks to build on that early promise. I think my concern about Nashville is I don't see where a great quantity of goals is going to come from with the roster as it currently is. You look at the players who are there. I mean, Dominic Badji figured in Portland, for example, who's a great workman-like MLS player, but he's not going to score you 15 goals a season, let alone 20. So I suppose that would be my concern. But there are always going to be limitations on any expansion roster within Major League Soccer. Those are evident with Nashville, but I don't think ruinously so. I mean, expansion teams can go one of two ways, can't they? Either they are Atlanta or LAFC, and they take the world by storm, or else they're the first year of Minnesota United, which was dreadful to watch, or even Cincinnati, even worse, last year. I would suggest that Nashville are probably somewhere between the two, but that's a good place to be in year one.
Yeah, I think Gary Smith has absolutely locked things down when it comes to organisation, defence. Clearly, Walker Zimmerman's arrival quite late was a big signing.
Yeah. I think Dax McCarty as well is a huge presence.
Yeah, I think he's been fantastic. I think the two holders in midfield have been excellent in the first couple of games. Actually, Dax in particular has been good. The challenge then for an expansion team, like you mentioned, it is throwing a set of guys together. You mentioned some of the teams have really struggled to do that. But I think some of the ingredients are there in Nashville with the experience across the roster as well that could see them just prosper as they settle into life as an MLS club.
Yeah, and I think key to all of this as well, Tony, is the presence of Gary Smith at the helm. Someone who's a course and distance specialist, winner of MLS Cup back in 2010 with Colorado. And that wasn't an easy club or team to manage at that stage, given the ownership and given various problems surrounding that side of things. And I don't think he necessarily totally enjoyed his time there. We sat and talked with him in the team hotel the night before the game in Portland, and he was very open about the issues that he'd had and the fact that off the back of winning MLS Cup, he went back to Europe, specifically to England, and hoped he was going to get a proper chance as a manager there. And in fact, he had a brief spell just over a year with Stevenage. I recall commentating on an FA Cup replay against Spurs when he was in charge at Stevenage. And he did well for a while there, but they are also a difficult club to manage. And his dream of forging a UK managerial career tended to die at that point. And then he came back, and I think he worked at Atlanta Silverbacks and gradually worked his way back into a position within the American soccer firmament where he was able to get the Nashville job. And I'm delighted for him that he has, because I do think with that depth of experience of Major League Soccer, albeit a few years ago, he's probably the ideal man to take a realistic view of what can be achieved and should be achieved in year one by a club like Nashville.
And surrounded, of course, by so many people that were with him in Colorado.
Yes.
Steve Guppy. Incidentally, actually, if you go on the Nashville SC website, nashvillesc.com, we've done some deep dives with both Gary Smith and Steve Guppy over the last few weeks, talking in depth with Gary about that MLS Cup win, how you win an MLS Cup, the route he took to do it. Also with Steve Guppy, really interesting talking to him just about one-on-one work that Steve Guppy does with players, and actually the time he likes to take with players just away from the group, something he feels he should do a little bit more with, and other clubs could learn from. So we definitely hope that once soccer returns, and we don't know when that will be quite yet, but that this is going to be an encouragement and a foundation from which Nashville is going to build through season one. John, of course, your time in America still relatively new as a full timer. But I've obviously watched and listened to you for many years. I want to get your thoughts on just some of the great games, some of the big moments that you have been lucky to call. I mean, what would you say perhaps was the best game you've ever had the privilege of calling?
The best game in terms of significance, drama, just the sheer number of events that were packed into 90 and subsequently 120 minutes plus penalties was probably England against Argentina, which I called for BBC television at the World Cup of 1998 in St Etienne. It really launched David Beckham the night that he was sent off for that flick at Diego Simeone, which Simeone, of course, exaggerated, but rightly Beckham was sent off by the Danish referee Kim Milton Nielsen. And I think now when we look back at Brand Beckham and its development and its extraordinary trajectory over many years, obviously marrying a Spice Girl helps. Being a very glamorous footballer and a good-looking guy helps, but you do need that little bit of notoriety in your makeup, and he got that night by being sent off and earning the opprobrium of the nation as they went out of the World Cup. But that game, it also had that wonderful goal by Michael Owen, which is one of the finest that I've ever seen at the tender age of 18. It had England hanging on with 10 men after Beckham had been sent off. It had Sol Campbell's goal being disallowed towards the end, and then the ultimate drama of penalties after England had dragged themselves through extra time against a very good Argentina side. So I would find that hard to top in terms of the number of events packed into that 120 minutes. But there are other games that stick in the mind as well for different reasons. I mean, people sometimes say, what was the most difficult commentary that you did? And that would probably be an FA Cup quarter-final at White Hart Lane, the old stadium at Tottenham, back in 2013 between Tottenham and Bolton Wanderers, which was the day that Fabrice Muamba collapsed and had a cardiac arrest on the pitch, and we had to stay live with minimal information. What we were getting from the tunnel was that the likelihood was that he had passed away. And obviously you can't say that in such explicit terms, but he was effectively dead for 27 minutes on the pitch. So that's a challenge for any live broadcaster, I think, to try and reflect that and get the tone right. So when you talk about memorable broadcasts, memorable commentaries, they fall into so many different categories. I mean, another one that would come to mind would be being the BBC radio commentator for Radio 5 at Selhurst Park the night that Eric Cantona jumped into the crowd, Crystal Palace against Manchester United, a notorious occasion. And the head of television sport at the BBC, a venerable gentleman called Jonathan Martin, was sitting in his bath somewhere in suburban London that night. And they were looking for someone to come in for a year and replace the veteran commentator John Motson. And he heard my radio commentary, and I got my gig on Match of the Day off the back of Eric's leap into the crowd at Selhurst Park that night. So I suppose what I'm demonstrating is that very different events, some of them more memorable than others, but all of them for a specific reason, I have cause to be grateful for, thankful for, and I will always remember.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is. I think in our profession, it very much is a case of being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes, isn't it? And it can be who's listening and when. I mean, I can actually picture myself. I don't want to make you feel too old, but I was in my bedroom, my parents' home, and I remember the night of the Cantona kick, and I remember listening to it and thinking, oh my goodness, this is just going to be one of the big stories of the first, the kind of early years of the Premier League, and just an amazing story, an amazing thing for you to call. I mean, just to go in on that, in terms of a commentator, I mean, how do you define for you just what a commentator needs to bring to the table when you were doing radio the night Cantona kicked into the crowd, so that's all about descriptive abilities, painting that picture. But then, of course, you could be doing it for television where everybody is seeing it, everybody knows what they've just seen. How do you kind of define, how best you do your commentary?
I think being a radio commentator and a TV commentator are two entirely different jobs, as you'll be well aware, Tony. And if you're a good radio commentator, there's no earthly reason why you will necessarily be an equally good television commentator, because the art is so different. And the art for a radio commentator, for me, it's almost like being an artist with a blank canvas in front of you, because your job is to paint pictures in the mind of the listener. And so often we're taught as young broadcasters to imagine you are talking to someone, maybe someone who's blind and is listening to their radio, and you are the only means by which they can try and in some way visualize inside their heads what's going on. So you have carte blanche to paint the entire picture, what the stadium looks like, what the players look like physically, how the play is unfolding. Obviously, geography is very important. But you can be impressionistic in the way you paint those pictures if you wish. You can use whatever style suits your approach. But when you come to do television, I think if you're going to do television properly, to me, it's always been a bit like putting a straitjacket on, because you're taking away 95% of the armory that you've utilized as a radio commentator, and hopefully which has made a good impression on people. So there's no place really for descriptive language. You've got to cut down by probably 95% what you say. I mean, when I moved from BBC Radio to BBC Television, I was working behind a couple of true veterans and great commentators in John Motson and Barry Davies. Very different styles, but for 30 years they'd vied for the top job at the top station at the time, the BBC in the UK. And I was the sort of office junior, the number 3 behind those two. And they both very kindly took me under their respective wings and gave me very different advice, but there were a lot of common points to that advice. And one of the best bits of advice I got was from Barry Davies, who was probably the master of saying particularly little. He said that your words have got to be many, many fewer than they are on the radio, but when you do open your mouth, they've got to carry some weight. And your job is just to augment what those 25 cameras around the pitch are providing. You can never beat what a camera is doing. However good your words or your sense of timing or your sense of insight, you can never be better than the cameras. But what you can do is add to the picture at one particular moment in time. But he said, if you're ever wondering, should I talk, and you're on the television, don't. Because if you're having to think, should I talk, it's not worth it. So I think one of the reasons he was such a great operator was that he was brave enough to embrace silence. And I think all of us can learn from that. You were asking whether my approach has changed in the United States. It hasn't particularly. I have to be a bit careful with vocabulary at times, just because certain words that I might use in the UK have different connotations in the United States, but I'm gradually ticking those off and being made aware, often through trial and error and mistakes, and using them, that I shouldn't have used them. But I think that idea of less is more is probably my mantra. I don't want people coming away from a game saying, God, that commentator was great, or God, that commentator was awful, in the same way that a good referee doesn't want to be talked about after a match. If you barely notice them, then in fact they probably have augmented the viewing experience for everyone. And to me, that's a job well done. You're not there to be the star. You're there to be the purveyor of information on occasion, but do it sparingly.
We've had a couple of questions just popping through the screen while we've been chatting, a little bit about academies and systems. And obviously you will have seen in England how academies produce some players. There's a lot of debate about how many they really do produce.
Yes.
It's changing as well in the US scene with the whole youth football setup at the moment, with news breaking on that just last week. Do you think that the kind of academy structure would work in Major League Soccer that we see in the European teams?
I think it could work to the extent that we see it in Europe. Now, there are some honourable exceptions to the general rule whereby academies don't produce that many players. Look at Ajax, what a record they have, but they are the exception rather than the rule. And so often when I was travelling around Premier League clubs, I would hear chairmen and directors and chief executives moaning about the amount of investment they were making in academies to perhaps get one player every 5 years, who might then not even be good enough for their first team on a long-term basis. So they might just about cover their costs for a year's operation by selling, if they're a Premier League club, maybe that player to the Championship, but they're rarely getting the long-term benefit. I think my other reservation with academies is that they're set up, certainly in the UK, in such a way that they are just peddling false hope to 98% of those that go through their doors, all of whom think that they're going to have this glorious career as a professional footballer. But effectively, they're there as cannon fodder. They're there to make up the numbers. And they're there really just to support the one or two prospects that might ultimately have a genuine chance of making it. Now, what I think in terms of America is that America is fantastic at producing athletes. And those athletes could play many sports. Taylor Twellman is a great example. Could have played professional baseball, for example, but chose soccer because soccer through his dad, Tim, was in his genes and in his family. He was also a very good American footballer. But he chose soccer. So I think there is this almost never-ending supply of really good athletes coming out of college, but at the moment, without the soccer ability. I look at the influence of Frank de Boer at Atlanta, albeit not in an academy setting, but they have a very good academy there, and he does keep a paternal eye on it because of his experiences at Ajax. And I can see players like Miles Robinson, the centre-back, coming through, who hitherto would just have been regarded as a good athlete. But I look at him as a player who is now being moulded into a proper footballer, a proper soccer player, because of that Dutch influence and the almost the academy setting that he is in, even though he's in the first team pool. So I think there's an awful lot to be said for academies, as long as they are guided and targeted, rather than just being big nets in which you take in as many players as you can from the states around you and hope to come out with the odd gem. I think it has to be a more targeted, focused approach than that.
And just quickly on, I saw another question come across, was saying about how good are the players that come out of the MLS draft system with the super draft and things. I mean, do you think that we are going to see drafted stars in the future? We will often refer to first-round draft picks that actually go on and become stars in MLS, or are they still likely to be players that are picked up through more traditional routes by being signed from one place or another?
Yeah, I mean, I think inevitably, just through the sheer numbers, the law of averages, you are going to get draft players that come through and will be stars. I mean, if you look at Minnesota United, for example, they've got a young player called Hassani Dotson, who was in last year's draft, who I think is going to be terrific. So that would be a good example of someone coming through the draft and making it all the way. And I think he may, given the fullness of time, if you talk to Adrian Heath, the manager there, he'll tell you that he's got the chance of going all the way in the game, not just in the United States, but on a more global stage as well. But I do feel that as Major League Soccer develops, and who knows what direction that's going to take when you look at the stories of possible amalgamation in some form with Liga MX being on the cards at the moment in the next few years ahead of that World Cup of 2026, I do think that more commercial pressures will be brought to bear so that promising young footballers, rather than going the college route, might be coming into those academies at the age of 10, 12, and there will then be age groups that will see them all the way through to making a first team debut at 18, when otherwise they might be in their first year of college. So I think that's a change that we're going to see. And don't forget that MLS has become much more of a selling league. You know, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago and you were to say to me, characterize Major League Soccer, it would be easy to lean on the lazy stereotype that it's a retirement home for aging European stars. Well, maybe it was 10 or 15 years ago in some regards. I think even then that would have been an unfair characterization. But now, if anything characterizes Major League Soccer, it's the ability of clubs with their good scouting networks to go to South America, get some young gems, polish them up and sell them on to Europe. And I think no one's better at that at the moment than LAFC, with the likes of Diego Rossi and Eduard Atuesta, who happens to be one of my favorite MLS players.
Yeah, I was just actually you've moved nicely on to the next question, and indeed we've seen a couple of the LAFC games as Jamie, Laurie, and I are continuing to get to know each other and get acquainted.
Yeah, my commiserations, by the way, having to work with Jamie Watson.
Oh,
I've had that misfortune a time or two myself. Dear.
Yeah, well,
you won't get a word in, Tony.
Well, he's talked so much on this Instagram Live the first few weeks, they had to bring me in to do it this week. And Jamie, I'm sure, is watching us from somewhere, and we're looking forward to having Laurie on the side.
Absolutely. No, you've got a great team there, I have to say.
Well, we are really looking forward to to bringing the broadcast to the national fans who just embrace this soccer club so much, and through a lot of adversity as well down the last few months. So. No, we look forward to that day soccer comes back. Our time is running short, so I want to very quickly...
So's my beer, Tony.
Yeah, well, actually, mine's getting quite low as well. This is, don't forget, the Instagram Live virtual happy hour with Fat Bottom Brewery here on the Nashville Instagram page. So very quickly before we wrap up with John, because at 11:30 at night in the UK, well, traditionally, the landlords at the pubs used to be ringing a bell, so I can kind of hear a virtual bell ringing somewhere at the moment. But yeah, very quickly, you just mentioned, favorite MLS players. Who for you at the moment? A couple of players that are really standing out in the league.
Okay, well, I mentioned Atuesta, who I think is fantastic. He's the metronome for LAFC. Everything goes through him. It was interesting towards the end of last season when they struggled against Seattle and went out in the playoffs. Seattle were just about the only side that really got to him and hustled him out of his elegant stride. But I think he's got the potential to go a long way. We mentioned Hassani Dotson as well. I think he is someone that I'm really looking forward to watching. And I mean, if we take the first two match weeks of MLS, not much evidence to go on, but I thought Minnesota United have kicked on again under Adrian Heath, and they may have lost one or two like Darwin Quintero, but this Luis Amarilla, the Paraguayan striker who's come in from Vélez, has made a very promising start. He's only 24 years of age. I think he has the potential to make a big impact on Major League Soccer when we get back to playing.
Yeah, and I think he's the guy who's promised 20-odd goals this season.
Yeah, not short of confidence.
Yeah, he's delivered in the first couple of weeks. Well, that is fantastic, John. Thank you so much for spending the time to join us for this Instagram Live. It's been really fun chatting to you, catching up on your thoughts on commentary, and indeed also, of course, on Major League Soccer's plans. Well, what we've seen so far in only 2 short weeks, but it all resumes. We look forward to watching and listening to you and Taylor on ESPN, of course, in their Major League Soccer coverage. And in the meantime, well, you're staying in the UK for the time being, but do stay safe there.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone stay safe, stay well. And I look forward to visiting the Fat Bottom Brewing Company on my next trip to Nashville.
Well,
I can't wait to come and experience the match day feel with you as well.
You will get the very, very best welcome at the Nissan Stadium when we entertain the ESPN crew when you come to Nashville soon, because we look forward to the games being back. Lovely mention of the Fat Bottom Brewery as well, because it's them who brought us this Instagram happy hour. And thank you for your points and questions that are coming from all over the world, I think, as well. And thanks for joining us on this. We'll say goodbye to John, and it's goodbye from me, Tony Husband, as well. And cheers to everyone. Remember, stay safe, everyone inside, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.